Hello, and welcome to Mini Adventures Mini. So this week I'm getting back into some of my D&D mini painting. I wanted to find something really fun and cool to paint this week just to kind of get my inspiration and passion flowing a little bit more. It's just something I wanted to delve into. So this week I went to the store and just fiddled around a little bit until I found this Hill Giant Mini that I really just liked the look of. I thought it would be fun to paint, so that's what I'm working on. So my quick little lore preview before we jump into the painting. A hill giant is kind of like the lowest tier of giant class monster you typically run into in D&D. They're big, dumb brutes. They're constantly hungry. They live extremely primitively in just like mud huts pretty much. They don't use any advanced weaponry, and their clothing generally consists of whatever animal hides that they can fit on themselves. They tend to terrorize any farmers in the areas that they live because they have voracious appetites that can never really be filled, so they will just eat their way through everything, including the farmers if they happen to be around. But as far as giants go, they're on the weaker end of the spectrum, so they're a great introduction to giants and might even make a good boss for a low-level campaign featuring a giant, or I guess a low-level adventure. Like I was saying, maybe a couple hill giants or whatnot are terrorizing a small farming community, and they hire adventurers to go deal with them. That's the kind of basic setup you might see for giants. So they're pretty simple like that, and they're very stupid. They're easily tricked, but if they ever notice they're being tricked, they fly into a rage. So they're kind of interesting monsters that can be run many different ways in D&D. But that's the basics, so we'll go ahead and jump in, and I'll show you how I painted this one. Alright, so here we have our pre-images for our stone giant buddy here. As you can see, I had a little bit of trouble fitting him onto my normal picture taking setup, so you can see a little bit of it at the bottom because this is just such a big miniature to work with, but it's still a lot of fun. So coming in here, I'm just doing my basing for this guy. You might notice that the video is sped up a little bit faster than normal. That's because this guy did take a lot longer than normal to paint, so the video ended up being fairly long. So I increased the rate at which the video is sped up so that we can get through this a little bit faster. But after I get the basing on, while I'm letting that dry somewhat, I just work on cleaning off some of these mold lines from across the model. There's not too many, it's not all that egregious, but there are a few that I decided to clean up. And I probably could have cleaned them up a little bit better. I got rid of the mold lines, but then I had a little bit of flecked off primer from this guy that ended up stuck on a little bit, and I worked with it best I could, but I probably should have done more to fix that. But after I do my cleanup, I use my Vallejo primer just to give everything a coat to get the bottom and recoat the areas I scraped off with the file. And then I use my sepia ink through my airbrush to put a dark base layer all over on this guy. Due to all of the interesting cracks and crevices with the musculature and his bag and whatnot, and so much of it being on a horizontal plane, I decided I wanted to go for a zenithal undercoat in order to kind of help show through more natural lighting, as well as make it easier to get the lighting effects I was going for, just using it as a guideline. So my second layer I'm using is a fire lizard from Army Painter, and then the upper highlight is this skeleton bone color, so that I get kind of a warm underlight. And it gives a very nice grading effect for me to follow. And so I take these three colors of brown that I'm using for the pack and his pants, and I'm just using the different colors as a guideline and just throwing the different colors on there kind of roughly and just kind of wet blending them together so that they get a bit of a smooth transition. And the two brighter colors of brown are about the same tonally, but I intermix them in order to get more of a patchy kind of effect. Almost like different bits of the leather that this is made out of are kind of like different levels of wear, or maybe one has had more sun exposure or whatnot. It's kind of what I was going for, and I kind of like the eventual look that I got going with this technique. You can already kind of see it coming together there a little bit. It looks pretty nice. I like having this zenithal underlayer as a guide to help me just do this basically quick and dirty wet blending to get some basic transitions going. For simple stuff like this pack or whatnot, it's a fantastic effect and lets me get these cool and fun transitions that look nice and smooth without having to work on it too hard. And on this top here, I have this like knitted area that I'm just gonna fill in with the kind of more saturated brown, because I'm gonna be having another effect with the grid of rope or whatnot that's tied over the top of it at a later point. So I just basically fill that in, and I'll be working more with it later instead. And then I come down here and I'm doing just the same thing with his pants, and you can see you got some very like nice shading effects going on there in those pants. It's very prominent, and I'm doing my best to preserve it. I don't know if I'm completely successful, but I'm trying my best, but we'll see how that ends up working out later. So it's just like me having to be patient at this point and just working my way around, trying to be careful, blend everything together. Some of the areas are a lot simpler than other areas, but you can already see it's not quite as tonally different, and I lose a little bit into the crevices, so I will be coming back over this with a wash later just to help unify everything and bring definition back into those recesses at a later point. If I was trying to put more time into this, I probably wouldn't use this kind of method, but this miniature was already going to take a long time to get through, so I didn't want to make this a multi-day project, because I've probably spent a total of about 4 hours of actual paint time on this miniature, which is much longer than I typically spend on most of my minis, so I didn't want to prolong that any more than necessary. But I still wanted to do my best to get as nice a look as I could. I'm also, you can see there, I just did the dark brown with some basic layering highlights on the wood just to get the effect I'm going for. And I know that this is showing like a lot of brown, but it just goes with the lore behind the hill giants. They're very simple, and they pretty much just, all their clothing is pretty much hides. So that's why I went with this methodology, and I try to spruce it up a little bit later on, which you'll see. But here I'm just working more on the ground covering. It's my standard method with the stone gray, and later on I'll throw a bit of a wash and do some dry brushing. So nothing different from what I've done before, but it typically looks pretty good, and not really any different here. So here you can see I've got this ultramarine blue, army green, and desert yellow that I use to do these patches that he has on his pants and his backpack, which I think helps bring in some much needed color and points of interest outside of the skin and hides and whatnot that make up his pants and backpack. And I just use the desert yellow color as just like I guess I use it for the ropes and whatnot, so he's got kind of like this rope belt thing going around his waist. So I paint that the yellow color, and then I do the same thing for like the borders on his patches here in a minute, but you'll be able to see that, like the ropes holding his bag together there, going around, and for this area of crossed, I guess just rope that's being used to hold down the opening of the pack, I just use that with this, and it just looks like a net, like a rope net that has been stretched over it, and I liked the effect that I ended up getting. So you'll see I'll just be working on this for the next little bit, but you can see with like the yellow border on the patches, it definitely looks like something we just roughly patched in there with whatever material was on hand and wasn't necessarily done super neatly or whatnot. So yeah, so I'm going through here and I'm trying to keep my lines clean, but I'm not being too worried about being exceptionally neat. I just need to get the color on there as efficiently as possible. just trying to be neat about it and not be messy. I had like a lot of like brush control exercise with this particular model, just trying to get all the paint where I wanted it without getting it anywhere else. And I have that in fine details, or I guess as compared to other things, fine details on this, as well as like broad areas, trying to get the effect I wanted over a broad area without necessarily overdoing it or underdoing it, just getting what I wanted out of it. But yeah, I'm just going around getting this yellow on as I need it in all the areas where I want it to be, bringing out some of the vibrancy of these colors with some second coats just to make sure everything shines through the way I want. Highlight out this branch a little bit just to make it stand out a little bit more as we're going. I struggled a little bit with this branch, trying to get it as I want. I come back to it a few times, but I bring out my uniform gray and more skeleton bone just to start doing the dry brushing here on the base. I realized I forgot about the black wash and went and did that just to fill it in. Let that dry a little bit, and it came up here, and I'm doing the same stone effect on the end of this guy's club. So I start with the dark stone and let that dry. And then here I'm starting my unifying layer of this burnt umber wash, and I just give everything a healthy coating, trying to make sure I don't flood it too much, but this just helps bring everything together and unifies it very nicely, and it brings it all closer together tonally. Well, you're still able to see the different contrast of the light and dark areas. And then here I dry brush on my uniform gray and skeleton bone onto the end of the club just to make it look nice. And I take my desert yellow and paint the ropes holding the club together with the stone head on the tree trunk that this guy's holding. I was going to say tree branch, but then I remembered he's a giant and it's a whole trunk. They just rip up entire trees to hit people with. That's kind of their style. So I go ahead and get all of that painted in thoroughly the way I want it. And then I take more umber wash and put that across it. Try to be careful not to get it on the rock, though I do get it all over the rope and the tree branch to get the effect that I want. And then I come in and I dry brush the ground to get it to the normal ground-like consistency that I've come to enjoy using, and I put on just about all of my minis at this point. And then we're getting started in on the flesh. I've got the 3 different flesh tones here from Army Painter, and I'm just using the same basic technique that I used on the bag and the pants, where I'm starting with the dark and I'm putting that in the shadowed areas and kind of wet blending it with the medium flesh tone on the raised areas that are brighter from the zenithal effect. And this gives me a nice, good, rough way to go off of the skin so that I get my shadows and highlights. Like I said, it is rough. It just gives me my basics and lets me get it in. And this is where you can really start seeing this miniature come together as the skin starts showing up, since that is such a big part of what makes this miniature. It's like at least 50% of like what you see just looking at him from the front. So it's a really big deal and is a major part of the character. And it's one of the reasons I picked up this miniature, since I have always wanted to try taking my skin tone to the next level. And this gives me a lot of canvas to work on that kind of stuff and get better at it. So that's kind of what I do. And so I'm just trying to make sure I get some nice smooth transitions between lights and darks, make sure that I get all these fingers set up. I did struggle quite a bit with these fingers, actually. I come back to it several times just trying to get everything set out the way that I want it. And just trying to get the opacity of the skin down properly. I do think that the zenithal effect has helped tremendously in getting this done the way that I wanted it to. And then the underarm of this guy's left arm was surprisingly difficult to reach with the brush. I had to be pretty careful not to get any on the pants, and it was kind of hard to get in there and make sure that I got everything covered properly. And you can really see this like starting to come together, just this whole skin tone here. But I do probably spend the vast majority of the time I spent on this miniature just fiddling with this skin tone, getting this base layer on, and then adding to different details just to try and get it looking the way that I wanted. Here you can see I pulled out some black just to put some color on his hair, just so that I could get around it more easily with the skin tone, and so that it didn't look so weird. I didn't want a blonde giant. I don't know why, I just personally felt like I should do it that way. And the face was also a little difficult for me. It's a bit shaped slightly differently from like most human faces, or the equivalents from like smaller minis. And maybe it's just because he's just such a fat character. This character is definitely a big, bulky guy. Despite the fact that he's a giant, he's got a lot of fat and fat rolls on him. And that was another challenge that I wanted to tackle, is like painting this kind of stuff. I thought that if I could paint this kind of stuff, it would help me with other kinds of body types and whatnot, trying to get it to look right and whatnot. So I keep going around with all of this, trying to get what I need. I add a little bit of other colors to some of my flesh tones, just to add a little bit of some washing effects. I add like a little bit of pink to my mid-tone in order to get kind of like some flushed red-ish flesh, which I think does a lot to add onto what's going on here. It really makes the skin tone look a lot more natural, and I just put it on really thinly and kind of glaze it in place. And I also get my basic skin there on the feet and on the legs and whatnot, and I don't have to do anything too fancy down there. I've said it before that if you spend too much time wasting time on details like boots and feet that nobody's ever really going to look at, you're pretty much just wasting your time. So I got that to basically where I wanted and didn't worry about it again. Just got it to where it needed to be. But when I'm doing some of this glazing up top, on some of the raised areas, like I said, I have some slightly pinkish glaze that I'm just putting as a very thin layer that shows through a lot, but just barely tints the skin a little bit pink. And then in some of the shadowed areas, I mix some of the darker skin tone with a blue, the same ultramarine blue that I used on the patches. And again, just glaze it very thinly into the shadowed areas to create kind of like a cool shadow versus like a warm highlight on the top. That's kind of the effect that I was going for, and I think it shows up pretty well and really kind of brings the skin tone to the next level. It's like before it was okay, but after that it just really shows the difference. And then here I'm starting with my normal method of the eyes. I paint some black onto the eyes and then fill the black in with some mummy white. And I'm actually doing an extra step here where I use this jungle green to make a bit of an iris. It's difficult to see here unless you're looking at it close, but this is a technique I haven't used on the smaller minis yet, since I haven't gotten enough confidence on doing eyes yet to try it there, but I want to get to that point at some point. But since this guy was bigger, I decided to practice a little bit with him, and so he's got some green irises on top of just having the normal eye technique I used before. It's just one additional step. Same basic technique, but it gives you some colored eyes. So I might try doing that more in the future and seeing what happens. But here you can see I'm actually dry brushing just a little bit of brown onto his skin, just to make it a little bit dirtier, like he's just got some spare dirt from his environment, because hill giants are very dirty. They don't really take baths. So I thought that his skin was too clean, and so I dirtied it up a little bit. And I still go around and tidy it up a little bit, but at this point we're more or less done with the paint job and just doing our final details. So I'm taking a little bit of my scenic glue and layering it down around the base where we don't have any rocks, and I use a couple different kinds of this green flocking to just get a nice looking effect there. And I'm spending more time here on the face, just trying to make sure the hair looks alright and getting the highlights on the face. I have the brightest highlights on the face so that it kind of brings attention to it and it stands out from the rest of everything else as well. But It's just tidying up here and there, adding a few more bits of skin tone and glazing even over the dirt, so it almost looks like it's old dirt and baked in and whatnot, and getting everything going. And then we got our last details here with this plate mail, just getting some of these metal rings and buckles and whatnot defined, some clips around his belt and whatnot, just making sure we get all that, and also getting these like fangs hanging off of his belt that I had missed before. So yeah, just tidying up some last final details at this point, getting those in, putting a little bit of a wash on them so that they stain the right color, and then we're finally done moving on to the varnish. And this really takes the shine out of the wash that I used on the brown bits and brings everything together into a great homogenized whole. So there you can see the final images. I'm really proud of this one and really happy with how it came out. Here in a second you'll see I put in another picture showing its scale versus a normal miniature along with a ruler, so you can see how big it is. And well, I'm pretty happy with this one. Alright, I hope you enjoyed watching that one. I had a lot of fun painting this mini. Some of these larger ones are kind of fun to do, though it's good to develop my skills on the smaller ones. Bringing it up and trying to see how it applies to these larger minis is a lot of fun, putting it all together and seeing what happens. I learned a lot about doing skin tones and whatnot from working on this guy, so that was a big useful thing for me to learn. And I really hope everybody enjoyed going along with this with me. So if you enjoyed the video, please give me a thumbs up. It helps out a lot. If you have anything to say, please put it in the comments down below. I love reading any comments that I get. And if you want to see more of my videos, please hit the subscribe button and hit the bell notification so that you can get updated whenever any of my videos get released. And as I said last week, I have now opened up a Patreon page, so if you're interested in supporting me, find the link in the description and you can go check that out. And with that, I hope to see everybody again next week.